Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about The Crow from 1994. Now, this is kind of infamous because of the death of Brandon Lee. I think there's no way you can kind of separate that from this film. I'll talk about that a little, but that won't really be the only thing. I grew up going to a lot of comic book stores, specifically in the first half of the 90s and pretty much all of the 90s, but the first half a lot. Because of that, and I was a kid, I was in elementary school and this came out and the whole randomly thing happened. It was a thing that I had wanted to see for like 2 years, basically, until I actually got to see it. When it came out, I was too little, or probably wasn't allowed and didn't even ask, but it was based on a comic book. So it piqued my interest and it was advertised in comic books I read. And the posters were at the comic book store, and the older kids were talking about it at the comic book store. So there was so many reasons I wanted to see, because I saw every comic book movie, and this was the one I couldn't see, and I didn't know the comic book, and I read some of it, but not really. And so it represented like the cool older kids, like teenage movie. I wasn't like there yet. I think it was like 11, maybe 10 when this came out. I was 10 when this came out. When I did get to see it, and with its cool soundtrack that was still being played on alternative radio when I started to become a teenager, this felt like this cool, kind of edgy, dark, R-rated. This is R-rated, I think. So to me, it has always sort of been that. It was always, people really loved it. In terms of comic book movies at the time, it was considered a top tier. Nobody thought it was better than Tim Burton's Batman or the first two Supermans or anything. But considering how not great comic book movies were at the time, and there weren't a lot of them, this was considered a better one. I don't know if people were really liking it. And I got obsessed as well when I could finally watch it. I watched so many different Halloween nights or the night before Halloween with my friends on Halloween parties that we'd always have in my house in the basement. With a few horror movies, I didn't really know much about what I was doing, but The Crow was cool and it was sort of gothy and stuff. Watching this as an older guy, I'm not 11 anymore, I'm a dad in my 40s, it's a different thing. It doesn't feel nearly as important. It does feel a lot more melodramatic. It feels a bit much at times. I think as a stylized 90s crime drama, it works in a lot of ways mainly because of its cast, who were both Brandon Lee and an insanely good supporting cast. I mean, it is like, while I was watching this, I was like, not only like Brandon Lee clearly is able to cut through the seriousness and give this film kind of a heart in terms of like, I think this kind of style and this kind of film would often veer towards the nihilistic, and he gives it such a heart and a warmth to it. Like, you kind of like Eric Draven, even though he's like Mr. Goth guy, and like when he becomes the Crow, a Cure song plays, and that's like probably the lamest thing I can think of, while also being the most goth thing you can think. I mean, it's like so fucking ridiculous, but at the same time, it's like the brevity he brings to it, the personality he brings to it, like it really cuts through that. Whereas like Keanu would kind of do that, but he like lets the kind of like the material speak sort of for itself, or lets the director vision go and stuff. Like, he will kind of like place himself within that world, but it felt like Brandon Lee was sort of cutting through that. Then he has such great people to work with, like Ernie Hudson, who obviously from Ghostbusters and stuff I think also does that, as well as Michael Wincott, who recently Nope and stuff, but he is like so good as a villain, like really great. The Yellow Ranger is not in this movie. I always hear that from people. It's Bai Ling, not the Yellow Ranger. She's not in this movie. I believe it's City of Angels. She's in it. I didn't look it up. But like John Polito as the pawn shop owner, David Patrick Kelly as a goon who's sort of like even legendary at this point. He was the guy in the Warriors who like clinks the bottles together. Warriors, come out and play, yay! Like he was like made for this. He's like perfect at this. Lawrence Mason as Tintin. Tony Todd, who's normally as the Candyman, is the henchman in this. I mean, it's just like the casting in this is so good. Like, it's just like, while I was watching, I was like, what is going on with it? Like, I hadn't seen this in a while, And like seeing it with all these supporting actors, I was like, no wonder this was like worked so well, because I do think if you got like your average, B level kind of actors in this, it really wouldn't work as well as it does, because like they're giving it so much sort of a soul to it in a way that it's like, yes, this is another revenge fantasy, and instead of Death Wish is a very similar thing. It's like his wife and daughter like murdered and raped and stuff, and in this it's like his fiance is, and then he's killed and he comes back to life. It's like a very similar thing, but it's like gothy and all that stuff. I think what works is you have these people being like on the level as a human while also dropping into that melodrama. And I think there has been things made, like you look at the Underworld, so you look at Daredevil, you look at so many of the 90s kind of or early 2000s cool thing of like, let's have a big soundtrack, let's go all gothy, let's have the trench coat. And I don't think that was all the Matrix. I do think this influences as well, but I think what those films never got that this film did is, one, like Brandon Lee like was a star in this. Like it was very unfortunate what happened to him, because I often wonder, like, would he have been Neo in the Matrix? Like how much that would have been different? Would he have been this? Would he, I don't know what he would have been, because it didn't happen. I know I'm not sure what he was even going out for, to be honest. I never looked at that. And I've actually never seen his other movies, which I should, because I knew he was in a film with Dolph Lundgren, and I liked Dolph Lundgren. So, or Rapid Fire, which I knew goth girls wearing the Rapid Fire shirts as well as the Crow shirts, up until like, I didn't see this until it was 2 years old, but this film had an extreme staying power. And I think it was because of what happened with his death, because of the soundtrack, which was a big deal at the time. I had that soundtrack. I think it was one among the first kind of CDs I bought, with specifically for the Nine Inch Nails song, and also because The Crow was cool, and I liked Violent Femmes and Rage Against the Machine, and I liked the movie. I ended up really liking that The Cure song Burn. Even though it's like watching him become a goth icon while a Cure song is playing is ridiculous, but and I'm not a big 90s Cure fan, to be honest. I'm more the 80s and stuff. I like a few 90s ones, but I actually really like Burn. When I used to play bass, I learned the bass part to that song. I really like that. But it's a pretty damn good song. Nine Inch Nails doing a Joy Division cover. I didn't realize how many covers there actually were. Like Pantera does a cover, Helmet does a cover. Helmet's really good. I always thought Ministry was in this, but it's actually My Life with the Thrill Kill Cult. Jesus and the Mary Chain's on here. Rawlings Band, Violent Femmes, I think you said. The biggest hit was actually Stone Temple Pilots, which I'm not a big Stone Temple Pilots guy. I like a few songs, but I don't honestly listen to them much. And that was a song I never particularly liked, but it was the biggest hit. And I think the only real award this film won was for Best Song for the MTV Movie Awards for that song. It was still playing in 96, 97, I remember. I don't really particularly like it. They're fine, I guess. They were just really overplayed for me when I was a kid. I think with Alex Proyas, who stylized the fuck out of this film, compared to what he do stylized-wise later, this is very mild, to be honest with you. This is very temple. Every day we look at like Gods of Egypt or No Way, or even Dark City, his next film. This is very much like, I would say, like toned down from this. But I still think there is a lot of stylization. I think it uses what Tim Burton set up with the Batman movies, and some people say Batman Returns. I think it leans more into Batman meets gritty action 90s movie. I'm honestly surprised Alex Proyas was never offered a Batman. I'm like, when I was watching, I was like, so you guys, like, nobody, that didn't cross anybody's mind that we should go, like, if you wanted a darker 90s Batman, it felt like this guy could have done it. It seems a pretty obvious answer. I don't know if like there was a phone call or he said no or anything like that, but like watching this film, I'm honestly surprised. It very much owes to the Tim Burton style, but kind of is like using it in its own way. I know it takes place in Detroit. They almost just say inner city and stuff that I always forget it takes place in Detroit. I just think it's like anywhere shitty city USA, but it does supposedly take place in Detroit. I don't think it filmed there though. I just think it's like there are a lot of 90s gritty dark action stuff, and this is pre-7, which I think after 7 everyone wanted to be Fincher. Before that it was sort of like, we want to be dark and edgy, and like we sort of know what film noir is, and here are some guns, and like John Woo's sort of influencing us but not fully yet. It's like kind of before everything, solidification happens after 7 and The Matrix and stuff like that. This is sort of a loose, like, we're still doing the grimy kind of thing, and this is, Death Wish is an influence on it. That kind of went out of fashion by the end of the 90s. I mean, it's a clear Death Wish. Sorry, the creator might disagree with it, of the comic, but I've always thought when I watched It's a Shame Brandon Lee didn't become more. This was released posthumously. I remember it was such a big deal. I remember it playing at the big theater. I remember playing at the Dollar Theater. I remember being on pay-per-view, and I couldn't see it until it was not even a new release VHS. But that was the real evolution of it. I don't mind watching this as I'm an older gentleman. I don't particularly think it is amazing. I do think it sets a lot of genre standards of, like, it showed you could make a comic book movie that could be profitable. I think the industry didn't really learn that. I think it did influence other kind of more melodramatic films that lean more into the melodrama, and because of what happened to Brandon Lee, didn't consider, like, the brevity and the star power he brought to it, where everyone else was like super serial all the time. And I get it, but it just isn't really working. This worked because you had a very talented director, Alex Proyas. You had a really good star with Brandon Lee, and you had an amazing supporting cast who were, like, perfect at it, like, perfect at being these guys. It is so unfortunate what happened. One of the stunt doubles, who was a friend of Brandon Lee's, was Chad Stahelski, who, interesting that was him, who go on to direct the John Wick films and stuff like that. I think of the time and of, like, the people trying to, this was the time people were embarrassed to make comic book movies, and they were not really as into this sort of thing. The 90s, very much things like low-key, gritty. This was able to use, comic books were booming at the time. It was a huge industry. They were selling millions of copies. They understood, Brandon Lee was on the rise. They understood, like, how to get this kind of goth, dark, alternative sort of thing to work for them. I think it got a part of early 90s culture, and even kind of, with The Cure and, like, with the Joy Division stuff, they wanted to score the movie but were too busy. I think they were able to capture a part of the 90s and able to capture a part of that culture. And it was a part of culture that I was super into at the time. So it sort of reminds me of that. I have pleasant memories of it, but it does feel a lot more melodramatic. I do think it works. I do think it is a good movie. It just, it probably plays a lot better when I was 13. I still appreciate it. I think Alex Proyas is an interesting director. This started my kind of interest in him for a lot of years. I think he kind of got a little too weird, not in a good way. Dark City is definitely his masterpiece, but I think this he shows a lot of promise in this. And if you watch more of these, like, gritty 90s action things, you can tell there's a lot of people who were not trying as much as he did. And it's sad we didn't get to see more movies with him. And it's sad we didn't get to see him showcase more of, like, his fighting and things like that. And, like, the action sequences are okay in this, but they're not tremendous. But I do think its style is enough you sort of let it go. It feels cool. It feels 90s cool in that way that, like, it feels almost imaginary, the perception of it. But the perception of it has never felt as real and a mood you can drape into as good as The Crow did. I think a lot of films and a lot of people want to be as effortlessly cool as Brandon Lee is in this, to bring a real humanity to a film that almost feels like it's impenetrable in its melodrama. What the real key to this film and how it worked was because you had all these great actors who were able to play that, able to play sort of a reality to it. I think a lot of films and a lot of people who tried to go after this kind of style would fall more into the melodrama. And this film, although it very much is, has a real lifeblood to it that I think is hard kind of to ignore while you're watching it. You could, if you passe and, like, have your arms folded the whole time, you won't get it. But if you really sit down and appreciate it, it's there. Yes, it's too long, like the sword fight thing at the end is, like, too much. Yes, it's not a perfect movie. I think it ultimately really works, and there's a reason nobody's let it go. Maybe it's just because of the soundtrack. Maybe it's because of the Brandon Lee thing. All of that is wrapped up into it. There's a lot of things that have wrapped up into this film that are not the film itself that has given it its reputation. But when I'm sitting down with the movie, I can't help but notice, like, how amazing it is that all these things came together on a low budget even, so I don't think anyone got paid that well, for The Crow. And I think like it was a cultural moment, and I think it still would have been a big thing had Brandon Lee lived or had none of that sort of thing happened. I think he was able to encapsulate something. And it's kind of just like a fun, melodramatic comic book fantasy, and there isn't a lot to compare it to at the time, but there's a lot of films that wanted to be compared to it afterwards, and I don't think any of them succeeded in the way, because I don't really want to watch Underworld or Daredevil or any of those films that try to do it otherwise. But maybe in 20-30 years I'll end up rewatching The Crow and kind of laughing at how I thought this was a very serious, dark movie when I was 13. I don't know if it is as much, but it's definitely a fun, gritty 90s action movie revenge ride. So if you have seen The Crow and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if